edition of Track Announcer's Notebook for 2020. Don't despair, we'll be back to kick off 2021. That will hopefully be a better year for all of us, as so much of 2021 is still TBA, TBC. But hopefully with the vaccine that has now arrived, things will continue to improve as we get through the next 12 months. So I'd like to welcome Andrew Knowles to Track Announcer's Notebook. Andrew, we're looking forward to talking about motorcycling, motorcycle racing, your years at Canadian Kawasaki Motors, and a whole bunch of other topics tonight. But first, to kick it off, we're going to go to my co-host, Stuart Nodell, with Nodell's notes for a Monday, December 28th. Stuart?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. I'll just first share my screen here and just go through some of the things that have been happening around the motorcycle racing and the industry itself. I got this #1 plate sent to me last week from Pete Swedish. So, and I know Super Carl, as he's known, is one of their favorites, and he sent them this last week. So I mentioned to Pete and Carol, I definitely would post it up and recognize Carl for his achievement. So congratulations to him on such an outstanding result.
And Stuart, hopefully Carl and the other riders will be at Daytona March 12, 13, 14. That, of course, is the ASRA and Championship Cup Series weekend, along with the Daytona 200. Carl Soltes, a great run in 2020 to grab that ASRA Sport Bike Championship.
Definitely. And then on some sadder news, we had the passing of one of the great motorcycle builders from England, and he was well known for building the Matchless, the GS50, and he was also the monocoque Norton, and also was well known from racing at places like the Isle of Man. In fact, they've named a trophy in his honor, and every year what they do is they give out the it's a trophy that's made out of a titanium connecting rod. And so he just recently passed away about a week and a half ago.
Yeah, very sad. Peter Williams, a great rider, but perhaps an even better engineer. The monocoque John Player Special Nortons that he raced, I think 1973, they took it to Daytona. That, of course, was the year before the advent of the Yamaha TZ 700 and 750. And he brought that John Player Special Norton home in 24th. The bike just didn't have the horsepower to run with some of the other 750s. And of course, the Yamaha TZ 350s. Jarno Saarinen won that year on a 6-speed liquid-cooled Yamaha. And the John Player Special actually made an appearance at Mosport. I think it was 74, maybe 75. One year did run at Mosport, but later that year in 73, Peter Williams did win the Isle of Man Formula TT class on that John Player Special Norton, a real unique motorcycle. There were only a handful of them built, and I'm sure they're worth a lot of money. But rest in peace, a great racer and motorcyclist, Peter Williams.
Yeah, and then the other news that was the other part of the news that was happening this week, Pat, was Moto America's announced they're going back to Brainerd. They haven't raced there in 17 years. I didn't realize it had been so long. But as you can see from the photo here, guys like Miguel Duhamel, Pascal Picot, amongst other Canadians that raced in the AMA and had lots of success. This, I know, is a popular stop on the tour.
Yeah, that track, I was there, I believe, Stuart, back in 1982. That's when they were still running the Formula One class as the premier class. And lo and behold, Canada's Alain Labrosse took the win that weekend on a Honda 500. It was my lone trip to Brainerd. The track's located about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul. Beautiful racetrack, big, long drag strip front straightaway. And yeah, I didn't realize that they had not been to Brainerd in all those years, but it'll be a great addition to the Moto America schedule for 2021.
Yeah, for sure. And then we had some moments this year that we wanted to classify as sort of our top 10 moments.
These are your top 10 moments,
These are my
Stuart.
top 10
And
moments, yes.
I probably have 8 or 9 of these. I would concur with you, but this is Nodell's Notes top 10 for 2020. Go ahead.
Yeah, so my top story for the year was Joan Mir and Suzuki winning the Premier Class in the Grand Prix Series for the first time in 20 years. And he's a second-year rider in the Premier Class with lots of talent, and I thought he did an outstanding job. And so that was my top story. Also, I'm biased because I'm a MotoGP fan, but I thought he did an outstanding job. And for my second story of the year, I want to give credit to Jordan Zoke. Obviously, we have Andy Knowles on the call with us tonight, and he was the brains and the architect behind all of those championships with Canadian Kawasaki. And Jordan maybe doesn't get the credit for how good he is and how great he's been. He's still competitive, and I still think he's the favorite to go for a 15th championship in 2021.
And Stuart, I'll bring Andrew in here, sort of a little preview. Andrew, did you think when you gave Jordan a chance to ride, I think at a track day at Mosport, almost a test on the bike to see if he could be competitive, that this guy all these years later would have 14 Canadian Superbike championships?
Well, Pat, first of all, I'd like to thank you and Stuart for having me on board. And there's nothing I like better than to sit down and talk about our common interest, enthusiasm, and passion, which is motorcycling. Jordan Zoke, now that we say this about passion, Jordan Zoke lives and breathes motorcycles. And from this young up-and-comer, I think at the age of 14, it was the first time I became aware of his name. And he was always someone that I thought definitely had the ability to be able to rise to the top. But whether it was ever going to be 14, 15 championships, absolutely not. Absolutely not. This is unheard of in the world. Even the number of championships that Canadian Kawasaki has was unheard of in the world. But Jordan is a great natural rider. He is a very talented individual on any kind of motorcycle. You've ever seen him on a trials bike as well too, and ice racing as well too. And now, of course, he's got a family that he's bringing into this generation as well too. But he's a great talent. And from the very first time that I saw him race, as you mentioned, putting him on an ex-Crevier Superbike and having him go out and run a few hot laps and come in with a big grin ear to ear, I always felt that it was possible. And as we were considering a rider to supplement our very impressive team, we were happy enough to have people like Michael Taylor and, our very, very good friend, Mr. Monroe, on board. I just felt that we had to sign him. We just couldn't be in a position where we allowed this talent to go to another one of the manufacturers. And although some people at the time might have felt that maybe we were being greedy, I just felt that he represented the future. And as you both just mentioned, here he is potentially competing for his 15th national championship. And I wish him nothing but the best.
Stuart, number 3.
So number 3, mine's Miguel Oliveira on the KTM. He had an awesome year. He's on the satellite squad, but that one event, the last event of the year, was so impressive. He dominated the weekend, really. He won the pole position and the race, and nobody had anything for him. And he just looked impressive throughout the year.
Yeah, it's too bad there weren't 100,000 Portuguese fans there at Portimao at that racetrack to cheer him on. Hopefully that'll happen if they go back there in 2021.
Yeah, hopefully they do. It was a beautiful circuit. And my 4th was Johnny Ray, again, another Kawasaki rider here, but he's won 6 World Superbike titles. And, he was maybe, again, not given the kind of credit he's maybe earned. He raced originally with Honda, and he was a front runner, but not certainly as dominant as he is with the Kawasaki team. They obviously have a great bike, a great group, and a great rider. Number 5, Cameron Peterson in Moto America, riding the Stock 1000 Suzuki for the Altus racing team. I think this guy should have a factory superbike ride in 2021. I've got to believe he's under serious consideration for the X-Star M4 Suzuki team run by Team Hammer. I know there's been rumors out there, whether it's Alex Dumas, the Canadian from Quebec, whether it's Cameron Peterson that we're speaking of, or even maybe Sean Dillon Kelly. I think those three are the front runners, unless there's somebody from outside the country that would potentially get that ride.
I agree with you, Stuart. I think somebody's going to scoop up Cameron Peterson. Of course, saw his father, who was a great 250 Grand Prix rider. So he comes from good racing stock.
For sure. Then Alex Dumas was my sixth favorite moment of the year. I think he started the season amazing. He really was riding with a lot of confidence, and he kept improving every weekend. He had that outstanding weekend in Pittsburgh where he did finish on the podium, and he looked to becoming more and more of a threat to Cameron Peterson. But as we know, he got injured at the Ridge in one of the superbike races, and he missed, I think it was 3 or 4 rounds, so that may have hindered part of his development, but he did finish the year strong.
Yeah, he came back at Laguna Seca at the last Moto America race, was on the pace, and I think he's going to be back in the stock 1000 class. He's just 19 years of age with a bright future ahead of him.
Yeah, I agree. Story number 7 for me, I think the SOAR Regional Racing Series as a whole, it wasn't just a moment, but I think they did an awesome year all year, dealing with COVID and the different protocols. And there was lots of what ifs and what's going to happen. But I think Ken McAdam showed some good leadership for his series, and they seem to grow. And I know he provides a great environment, and it's a family sort of friendly type racing environment, and they're doing great things out at Grand Bend.
Yeah, I managed to get down to that final round in early October. They had record entries throughout 2020, did an outstanding job of dealing with all the COVID protocols. And I think for that last race, they were even allowed to have about 100 race fans out. So they were the first organization to come out with their 2021 schedule. They've got a strong 6-race schedule that'll kick off in the month of May and carry right on through to October. So congratulations to Ken McAdam and the entire team there at SOAR.
Yeah, and then for my 8th favorite story was part of the SOAR series was that 600 championship. I know Elliot Vieira led most of the season. He was having a great year, and it went down to the wire between Chris Pletch, Elliot Vieira, and David McKay on the Kawasaki. And I thought they had a great season, but that race in particular had lots of drama in it, and Chris Pletch came out with the win.
Yeah, and sadly, we were hoping to see a 3-rider battle to the end. It was run in the wet, but off the start, Elliott and David McKay got together, both of those riders crashing, and Nathan Playford ended up winning it, a amateur racer, but Pletch did what he had to do to take the championship. Congratulations to him. And of course, another rider who comes from good stock, his uncle and his dad, both great racers back in the late 70s, 1980s at Shannonville, and run Stratford Cycle Center. So congratulations to Chris Pletch in what was perhaps the tightest of the championship battles in the SOAR series.
Definitely. And then for my story number 9, I really got into following the American Flat Track series this year. I've always liked flat track, but just haven't really ever followed it closely enough. And then just through us doing our Zoom calls every week and learning about it, I found it pretty fascinating. And I think Briar Bauman did an awesome job winning his 2nd championship.
And again, American Flat Track did shut it down for a couple of months. We're able to restart it at the Barberville, Florida half mile, and then wrapped it up at Daytona, running the old short track off of turns 1 and 2 of the super speedway in October. And once again, Indian dominated the championship. And I think with Harley Davidson officially folding its factory team, depending on local dealers to support Harley riders that it's going to be another Indian wrecking crew story in 2021. And Stuart, just a footnote on that, in terms of flat track here in Canada, exchanged a couple of texts with Aaron Hesmer. Canadian flat track, they're working on their schedule. Again, so much is still up in the air, but they are looking at a schedule that is sort of their preferred schedule. And then depending on what happens with COVID, there is a plan B schedule. They hope to have that announced and released in late January, maybe perhaps early February. So it looks like we will have flat track racing back running again here in Ontario in 2021.
That would be great. I'd love to get out to a couple of those events this summer, if it's possible. And then we'll wrap it up with the 10th story, for me anyways. It's another Indian story, but it's King of the Baggers. It seemed like a bit of a laughing stock at first, but they actually put on a pretty incredible event and got everybody talking.
Yep, indeed. And I hear that Moto America is planning on running the Battle of the Baggers class at selected events in 2021. So Stuart, great top 10. And now we go to our guest tonight, Andrew Knowles. We got him to jump in there and give us his inside look at Jordan's Oak. Again, welcome to everyone who is on our Track Announcers Notebook final show for 2020. We hope you've had a great Christmas holidays, and we wish you all the best in the new year. Andrew Knowles, it's not Monday evening where you are. It's mid-morning on a Tuesday in Osaka, Japan. How have you been celebrating the holidays?
Well, Pat, yeah, good morning, and thank you to everybody for coming on board. I think this show, this webcast, is a fantastic idea, and great for you guys to put your full support on it. From my point of view, what have I been doing? Well, I think the headline for everybody in 2020 is COVID, so I've been keeping a low profile. But Japan is very, very different in the way that they've approached it, both from governmental regulation point of view. So there's no lockdown here. It is more a culture of being community minded, which is a great privilege to be part of. So it's been quiet, but every once in a while I break out, and restaurants are all open, bars are still all open, and so are the cultural events. So I will try and head out every couple of weeks. So I don't go crazy, but things are quiet here as they are back in Canada.
Andrew, it is a long way and a different path from being the national sales and marketing manager at Canadian Kawasaki for 6 years, and before that you were a DSM for Kawasaki, to your current role as a professor at the university there in Osaka, teaching second-year Japanese university students to prepare to go overseas and take their third year of schooling at a university either here in Canada or the United States or another country. How has COVID impacted that work that you're doing?
The most dramatic thing, of course, is the whole movement from what termed face-to-face teaching or face-to-face business towards online. And as a teaching professional, to be able to interact and engage students online, which is a very different thing and a totally different way of doing it on a variety of levels, the physical level, but obviously the mental and the emotional level as well too, to be able to connect. So that's the biggest difference right now. And it's funny because to come all the way to Japan to then teach online seems a little funny, but it's very important for me to be part of this culture when I'm dealing with the Japanese students. A language can connect, but cultures are very, very different.
Andrew, let's go back to the beginning. I know that motorcycles and motorcycling wasn't part of your family growing up. Where and when did you get the motorcycle bug?
That's a great question, Pat. I'll try and be succinct. Grade 9, out in the parking lot, the smoking area, as we used to term it, and up rolls this little Kawasaki 3-cylinder 2-stroke. And I'm going, what is this? Of course, all the people run down, cluster around the bike. And I think at that point, I knew I always wanted to ride a motorcycle. I didn't have a lot of experience with it. From that point on, I always had that seed planted. So I ended up purchasing a used CB 450, which, have to laugh, the thing had a variety of issues and problems with it. I remember somebody asking me once, is it a custom model? And the joke was, the only thing it's accustomed to is being pushed. So I didn't make a good start in the motorcycle industry, but I think that resonated with me. And even with the challenges, maybe it was the barrier that pushed me. It was from there on in. Now, my background after leaving university, where I was business orientated, was to get involved in retail. And I worked for Hudson Bay Company for 5 years. After that, I had a breakup with them, spent a summer trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and thought, I'll get a job at a motorcycle dealership. Why not? Another motorcycle, and had a number of them at that stage and really enjoyed it. So the famous Hurst Yamaha group, Peter and Chris Hurst, Canada's largest Yamaha dealer, I went on board and worked with them. At the end of the summer, instead of letting me go as seasonal help, I ended up going towards staying with them. And that was the start of my career in motorcycling. I worked through the dealerships, spent a total of 5 years there, went from sales to parts manager, and then went into sales manager, and then had an opportunity to go with an aftermarket selling company. Full opportunity to experience not only the dealership, but the entire industry. And I got to visit all the dealers in Ontario and got to know them. As a district manager with BMW. It came down to two people, myself and Art Newman. Art, who has been around the motorcycle business forever, and he was actually the guy who was let go at Hearst. But fate was on his side. He got the BMW district manager position. For a reason, and actually I was talking to Suji the other day, I saw an ad in the paper for Canadian Kawasaki. The stars aligned. I happened to see it that one day, applied, and that started my career at Canadian Kawasaki. And they were impressed with the fact that I had gotten to know the motorcycle business, my business background, and there it became a corporate career for me.
And Andrew, that first district sales manager's job, what was your territory and who were some of the dealerships that may not even be around today that you were dealing with back in the early 90s?
Well, that's a very interesting, because as they say, the only change, or the only thing that remains the same, is change. So when I came on board, there were a variety of dealerships that were up and running. So my territory was Southwestern Ontario. So literally from Abs, all the way over in Oshawa, all the way down through the Windsor area. And you know, it's funny, you mentioned Stratford Cycle, John Pletch. I used to visit him all the time. He would never sign on board with Kawasaki, but he was a guy that I wanted in the Stratford area. But through that whole area, so John McBride, who was already on board, I was instrumental in signing Cycle World and bringing them on board. They became a big part of the dealership chain. Of course, I mentioned Steve Crevier, Competition Wheels, a number of dealerships. And I apologize if I'm forgetting anybody, but to sign dealers, at that point, the multi-line story was building. But I remember signing Kawasaki with the Sturgis Group down in Hamilton, signing on board Robbie Micklejohn with Kawasaki, and just really expanding the footprint of Team Green.
Yeah, Andrew, back then, did you think that so many of those dealerships that you mentioned, their Cycle World, McBride Cycle, Rocket Motorcycles, would not be around today? Did you see the dealership landscape changing as much as it has over the last, say, 20 years or so?
What's the best way to answer that? I'm surprised, but I'm not surprised. I'm saddened more than anything else. To be in our business is truly a privilege. This is what's known as a lifestyle business or an enthusiast business. And as I think a number of dealers and manufacturers have found out, you need a balance of enthusiasm in business. And a lot of dealers were high in enthusiasm, short on the business sense, and vice versa. So to me, the perfect one was somebody who developed their business around a good understanding of what motorcycling was, never forgot that enthusiasm, but was able to build a business foundation that enabled them to survive. And that's a difficult thing, because the ebb and flow of the motorcycle business, from literally the tens of thousands of non-current motorcycles that were available in the 80s towards what's going on now, including their price, including insurance. It's a challenge, but for those with passion towards motorcycling, there's always going to be those opportunities there.
Andrew, when you started as the district sales manager at Canadian Kawasaki, just looking at the 80s, that was Steve Crevier's first Superbike championship on a Kawasaki. He, of course, had won in '89 on a Yamaha. And then there is a string of 9 years in a row where you're at Kawasaki and you guys keep winning the Superbike championship, first with Crevier, then with Taylor, then with Don Monroe, and finally Jordan Zoke and Francis Martin in 1999. What was going on behind the scene in terms of not just the riders you were selecting, but the whole support crew in terms of team managers and technicians and building that winning culture?
Well, I suppose, first of all, I should say that I was very happy to have the opportunity to be on board. It was something from a career point of view that not only had I worked hard for, but I had the opportunity to do it. But it certainly wasn't just me. We had an entire team that was on board, and we had a dedication and focus towards building the enthusiast nature of the sport. So you start with, what does your brand mean? What does it stand for? And there's a thought that your customers actually own your brand. I always had the feeling that any corporate executive should walk up behind a couple people during a motorcycle show and hear, with no crap, what people think about bikes, brands, everything else. So Team Green, what does it stand for? What it stands for is a high enthusiast level motorcycle in any category, and a company that is going to support motorcycling. What's natural for Kawasaki? Competition and speed. Road racing, that's just normal. Same thing with KX and the dirt bikes. So each one of the 6 motorcycle categories had a separate strategy. For the ZX or the Ninja series, of course, the green, what did it stand for? It stood for winning heritage, that anybody could be part of motorcycling and Kawasaki's Team Green. So that's what it was all about.
I think we've got a few questions. We're going to go to Stuart and cover those, Stuart, and we'll get back to Andrew.
Yeah, thanks. I've got a couple of questions, and I know we're going to have Bob Caldwell come on with us shortly, but he's asking what Andrew would have learned from Koa Yamada, the grandfather of the Ninja. And when he went there, what did he get to ride?
That's actually a great question, because one of the things that I shared with Pat earlier, just outside Osaka, a town by the name of Kobe, they have the Kawasaki Museum. In the museum, one of the key displays is the new Kawasaki H2, of which not only was Kohei Yamada, the father, an engineer behind the ZX-10, ZX-11, but he was actually the driving force before his retirement of the H2 series. And what did I learn from him? Well, that's an interesting. Let's just say that all people do not necessarily receive the same gifts in every area. So the idea of interacting with people is a lot different than interacting with machines. But I will say, and give full credit to Kohei, he came into the business as an engineer. They have the cyclic way of managing, which means every 5 years, a number of subsidiaries around the world change personnel to give each of their team an expertise in different areas. He came to Canadian Kawasaki Motors as president with no background in sales and marketing and had to learn it. There were times it was a rough ride, but by the same token, there was never a doubt for his passion for Kawasaki and his passion for speed. But to answer Bob's question, he pursued an academic focus on learning sales and marketing at some of the best universities, first in Canada and then in the States. As a member of the executive team, he allowed that opportunity for me as well too. So in many ways, he helped springboard my career and my ideas to a much different level. And so I'll always thank him for that. But he was a challenging dude to work for. And when he walked into your office, you never know what was going to be said.
Yeah, that's great. That's great insight into how the Kawasaki worked internally.
Stuart, anything else?
We've got one other. It's an anonymous person. They're not listed, but I'm going to assume there's somebody that worked in the motorcycle industry because they want to know who Andrew's favorite person on the finance side of the motorcycle industry was.
On the finance side,
That sounds like a Doug Snow question, Andrew, if he's on board tonight.
Well, you know, the very interesting thing to answer that is that I talked about a dealership being a balance of enthusiasm and business. And it's funny that you mentioned that name because, yes, of course, the one that comes to mind, there were a number of excellent finance people that I spoke with, but Doug Snow was the individual that comes to mind. And it's because of that balance of enthusiasm and that balance of business sense. We talked a little bit earlier when we were just getting to know each other about the good days look after themselves, the bad days, where as a racer, you need a few points no matter how you feel. As a businessman, when a dealership is against the ropes and your credit line is what allows you to bring in the new models, it's key to work with a dealer who understands how to run the business, but also a finance partner. And that was one thing Doug was able to work through. There is the reality of numbers, but Doug was excellent at being able to work through the blips where there were challenges. And because many enthusiasts are there, you look at the amount of money that you're making, your profitability. Like a lot of other enthusiast businesses, it takes a lot of work to do that. So you need partners. You need the manufacturers to be aware of the challenges of being a dealer. You need a finance company who is aware of the challenges of being a dealer. So it's working together. But the one individual, if it is a plug, I don't have any problem giving it because Doug, you're one of the good ones.
Stuart, we got anything else for Andrew?
We do. We have a couple more. There's a second part to Bob Caldwell's question, and he just wanted to know if you got to ride anything fun at the Kawasaki Formula One track in Japan.
Well, okay, I can't share every story, but let me share a really, really good story. There was a 2-mile long oval test track of which Kawasaki would go out. I did a lot of partnerships with a number of the international subsidiaries, and I was there with KMC, who is the US. So this oval track, 2 miles long, had 3 lanes on a severe banking similar towards Daytona. The first level, you went up to 120 kilometers. The second lane, moving up, you got up to 240 kilometers. The top lane was for speed above that. They had assembled this was when the brand new ZX-9 came out. They had all the Yamahas, all the Suzukis, all the Kawasaki's there, and myself and about 20 others were privileged enough to take these bikes to their very limit. And that has to probably be the time that in Japan that really just blew me away, to be going close to 300K sideways, passing somebody coming onto the track down below was a remarkable experience. But that was one of the greatest privileges of my position, all the way from being with Jamie and the crew, riding on the KLR 650 up through the Arctic Circle, to actually be riding some of the Team Kawasaki Team Green bikes and riding them on the tracks in Canada, which was an amazing experience. But I always felt it was critical. If you weren't riding as a manufacturer, if you weren't thinking like a rider, how could you possibly connect? It's one of the reasons why I strongly believed at whatever executive level you were at, you needed to be out. And that was one thing that Kohei actually said. Behind the desk is a dangerous place to manage a company. Get out. So when a dealer calls you, you see the world through the dealer's eyes. And that I felt was also something that was very valuable to me.
Stuart, anything else?
Yeah, no, that's great. We have one more from Michael, and his question was to you, Andy, is that, did you have any previous business experience previous to Kawasaki with any Japanese methods of business, and have you had any since?
That's a great question. It's very interesting because the Japanese, when I was growing up, were known as copiers rather than innovators. And that is not true, but in some ways it is true. I think it's always smart to learn from what has been done before you. So while I was involved at university, I studied a number of the Japanese models, the idea of constant improvement, which was Deming's contribution towards the Japanese car industry in the 60s and 70s. So the idea of constant improvement, the idea of focusing on your business, but also the idea of trying to understand both profitability, but also your customer, and to keep them in line. To that point, I would like to say one of the things that draw me into teaching is I believe till the day you die, you're always learning. But we are all always teacher and student. So I hope I keep learning these Japanese methods all the time, but they are critical. But I will say, what comes from the traditional, we'll call it Canadian, American, British way of thinking, is more creative style thinking. So as always, we're better when we work together.
Yeah. Andrew, earlier, sorry, Stuart, go ahead.
No, I was just thanking Andrew. I think that was great insight.
Andrew, you mentioned your visit to the Kawasaki Museum with Suji Yamazaki. Give us a few of the motorcycles that you saw there that are sort of part of your era of going and following racing. What are some of the bikes that the folks on Track Announcer's Notebook tonight would be very familiar with?
Great. Well, definitely the one that captures my mind, and of course is in the era of which I am and everybody is the first AMA Superbike winning bike of Eddie Lawson. I mean, to me, that then became a manufacturer model later in the lineup, the ZRX 11 and 12. I mean, to me, that Eddie Lawson, and I remember growing up, riding with my buddies down to Loudon, New Hampshire, and watching Eddie and Wayne Rainey and Schwantz and all these guys battle it out. And then later on, following up with the same crews down in the American GPs down at Laguna Seca. So, I mean, at that point in time, that bike was truly impressive. Of course, they had the KR 500 of Cork Ballington there. And that was very impressive, a little bit before my time, but very impressive. And they had a large display on the new style H2 as well, too, with motor cutaways and so forth. Very funny. I mean, Kawasaki is always known as an engineering style company, definitely speed focused. But the ability to be able to relate to the enthusiast, I thought was always very, very important. But they had in this museum literally everything. Kawasaki got its start as a shipbuilding company, was involved in airplane engines, so that was covered as well too. It has a long, long history in Japan. But as we walked through all the motorcycles, there were also helicopters there. Kawasaki's very, very big in robotics as well too. So it's very interesting to see what is common is engineering and the ability to be able to manufacture superior, reliable, and fast machinery.
Andrew, let's revisit that decade of the 90s, where, as I said earlier, starting with Steve Crevier in 1991, you guys won 9 consecutive Canadian Superbike championships from 91 to 99. Give us your quick 30-second Howard Cosell version of what each one of those 5 riders were like to deal with, and how they maybe differed in all your dealings with them, starting with Crevier, moving on to Taylor, Monroe, then Jordan Zoke, and then finally Francis Martin.
Yeah, fabulous. Very interesting. I mean, each one of them was a superior motorcycle rider and racer. But I'm also very pleased to say that they were all fantastic people. What drove them was their focus to win. Because Kawasaki was always a company that was able to put forward a stable, including a team concept. To me, it was always about a team concept, including our superior engine building, Tony Russell, who was the fuel behind a number of our championships. So first of all, when I came on board, Crevier and Michael Taylor, I shared with Pat earlier on that the very first weekend as a Kawasaki employee, I showed up at Shannonville, which I had been to many, many times before, but this was the first time I even had to buy my Kawasaki shirt to make sure I was in team green. And of course, in the very first corner of the Superbike race, Michael unfortunately took out Steve, and I turned and looked at my colleagues, and Kawasaki obviously was not going to win that race. But as you said, Pat, they came back a number of times. Michael was a gentleman. Michael always was. Michael was always a competitor. Steve had left to go to the AMA with Rob Muzzy and achieved a lot of success down there. Michael was bouncing between Canada and the AMA, was an AMA Rookie of the Year, and I thought he would follow that pathway too, but unfortunately he got hurt along the way. But a gentleman, a great rider, always a smile on his face, and always somebody who took the bit between his teeth and did things in a little bit of a different way. Michael's the guy who, full-on Superbike, Don Monroe takes the full-on ZX7RR with full of Japanese bits from KHI. Michael decides he's going to race as a ZX9. That was his own idea, his own project. So Michael was a unique individual, but he was amazing. Very Canadian in the way that he did things, but a driven individual. Don Monroe coming next was different. Came from the East Coast, but his career was a computer background. He was very quiet, analytical, but the power, spirit of competition in that man was just something else. Superbikes, a run of 600 Supersport Series wins, championships, and he was just somebody who showed up at the track. Tony Russell worked with him. Michael at that point had his own team of mechanics and technicians. And Don just had a way of just eking out a win on a consistent basis. Pulling up in his cube van, getting ready to go at every track from Shuby, Shannonville, Mossport, to be able to go all the way out to even some of the temporary tracks out west. Westwood was before me, but to be able to go out and see him ride smooth, fluid, was absolutely amazing. I made mention of Jordan Zoke at that point in time. Jordan, young man, full of fire, full of natural talent and ability. And he just had a way of riding that was just over and above many of his contemporaries at that point. I always felt that he was destined for some very big things. Although, as we said, I had no dream he would be able to rack up 14 national championships. But I was with him as he transitioned from his Canadian Superbike win down towards tryouts and then obtaining a position with Ducati's Fast by Faraci, and certainly wished him well at that point in time. But he's gone on to be a champion in his own right. But he certainly did great things from our point of view. And then, of course, Francis Martin. Francis Martin was an amazing individual. He had been riding another brand. As many of the riders might know, I actually enjoyed being in the pits and visiting people. I would often go up to Neil Jenkins on his Suzuki and say, you should join us. I would say to Frank Trombino, you should come and join us. I remember sitting down at a track out west and saw our crew. We would always, after the weekend, have a big team dinner, and I would invite the racers and their teams, which was very unique. And I appreciate Kawasaki giving me the latitude to do that. Frank was out there, and I think it was in his second year, and he was over with his team having, so I sent a bottle of wine over to Frank, said, Frank, you should come and join us. So I was always looking for ways to supplement our team, build our team. People like Jeff Williams, very much important in being part of it as well too. But terrific. But Francis Martin, quiet gentleman, very much focused. We won that year. We had some adversity, but great racer as well too. Unfortunately, I was ready to sign him again, but he signed with Suzuki the following year. So I had to do what I could to race against him, and we were lucky enough to win.
Well, that's an amazing record, Andrew. Of the 11 years you're with Kawasaki, you guys won the Superbike Championship 9 times, and as you mentioned there, Don Munro, 5 sport bike championships in a row. Very, very impressive record. A couple of days ago, you had a meeting with Mr. Yamazaki. I know in 2030, that's only 10 years from now, or less than 10 years from now, all of the motorcycles that any of the Japanese manufacturers are going to be building cannot run on fossil fuel. Based on that conversation, where do you see the whole motorcycle industry going in the next 10 years as we transition from fossil fuel powered internal combustion engines to electric to hydrogen and some of the other alternative fuels that will power our motorcycles of the future?
Yeah, okay, thanks, Pat. That's a great question. And I actually did talk with Suji specifically on this. I mean, I had my own ideas and understanding, but we really had an opportunity to flesh this out. So first of all, let me say that that future is very much going to have a very heavy impact on not only dealerships, but marketing, which also includes racing as well too. I think as we see in Formula One with Honda deciding to pull out of its engine program and the Formula E series that's going on right now, the cars with their hybrid motors. So where are we going with motorcycles? I asked the question specifically on hydrogen, and the answer was that's not the direction they're going in, but never say never was frequently what we were saying. It is envisioned in 2030, what will be focused is not so much no fossil fuels, but very strict emission controls to the level of which, if your engineering is not there, you will not be able to participate. So the vision was very much one for the motorcycle manufacturers of hybrid technology. The thought is that it won't so much be pure electric, although that is possible. They already have it in smaller vehicles, and I can't tell you the number of vehicles, automotive and motorcycle and scooter, that in Japan currently are here. But it is envisioned that there is going to be elements of hybrid and electric technology now. Now, there's a number of issues that have got to be solved. We have a network of gasoline filling stations. We need charging stations. We need the price and cost of electric vehicles, motorcycles, and cars to come down. There can be government subsidies, but it's got to become part of our life. It's not like all of a sudden seatbelts are mandated, manufacturers and could put them in. This is totally new technology. So what are we going to be seeing in 2030? I would imagine there is going to be a transition between a hybrid style motorcycle of electric and fossil fuel, moving towards a pure clean energy system. Now, can they do it in a fossil fuel capacity? I mean, I honestly don't know. And the powers to be that I've talked to would say the same thing. So what we're looking at is a totally different kind of vehicle in 2030 to 2035. Now, one of the things that we talked is dealer and marketing. Marketing is about racing. Where does racing go if there's no more fossil fuels? Well, human beings are competitive. If they had to run, throw a stone, do whatever you want, there will always be competition. So as long as there's vehicles, there will be competition. How it will work, I don't know. As you and I were saying, we love the sound of a motorcycle. I remember the first time I ever went to Shannonville, and before I could even see the bikes, I could hear that sound. And I almost started running towards the track. So how are they going to bring that on board? That I don't know, but I can tell you, I believe technology can work together to do it. I don't think the technology is going to be like the Harley Live Wire, where it's a pure electric bike. You know, regardless of our friends in the long way up the world who were able to come across the Western continents on their live wire, I think it is going to be that hybrid style. Racing definitely is going to be looked at. I know that all the manufacturers have had meetings over the past year, particularly with COVID and the profitability challenges with COVID in many areas, about is it appropriate to continue? And from a dealership point of view, you asked about that as well too. Where does this leave dealers? Well, dealers that have been on board with a balance of enthusiasm and business sense, I believe there'll be a place for them, and there always will be a place for them. It's similar towards a manufacturer defining their brand and what they stand for. If a dealer doesn't stand for something more than selling a bike, it's not going to work. So let me share with you a Kawasaki experience of what Kawasaki in Japan is doing now. They are going with a new style dealership. It's called the Kawasaki Plaza. These are not large dealerships, but they are single line dealerships that pass a rigid criteria, including finances, to totally focus on supporting the rider experience. This is not what became in Canada in many stores, almost a Costco of a dealership selling 7 brands. Not to say that they are not powerful retailers, not to say that they're not enthusiastic. They can be. I look at dealerships like Blackfoot, for instance, who really support the industry and their products, but carry many, many brands. But this Kawasaki Plaza is a new style of focus. And these sell a primarily suggested retail price. They don't wheel and deal. But what they do is they provide ultimate support of dealerships. And it's very clear what they stand for. So to any dealer, I would say, what do you stand for? What would your customers say about you? Your motorcycle breaks down on Christmas. Are they going to get you going again? Do they have clubs? Do they lead rides? Are they involved with driving the sport? And really, there was a question about what I learned from the Japanese. One of the things that I learned is that our two cultures working together is what's important. So you need to be able to answer that question. I remember going to a worldwide meeting of Kawasaki subsidiaries. We had an aging dual-purpose motorcycle known as the KL650. Dealerships were screaming for new models. Kawasaki had asked me to talk to the group because at that point, the KL650 was the largest selling dual-purpose bike in the country. But the reason it was is we supported it. We went to the Arctic Circle. We supported the idea, not of this bike has a bunch of features, but this bike can transport you from behind your desk to an experience. And if the dealers and manufacturers don't get it, then I don't think the customers will as well.
Thank you, Andrew. Stuart, I know we got a couple of questions or comments, but let's see if we can get Bob Caldwell on here as a guest, as we've got just a few minutes left in the show.
Okay, I'll try and confirm they're his questions, so I will try and confirm.
Okay, if we can get Bob on there and do this officially on here. Andrew, as you look ahead to 2021, from what you know right now, what does our motorcycling world look like in terms of sales, in terms of racing?
Okay, so I'll answer that in two ways. The first one is sales across the developed world have been absolutely fantastic. We've seen double-digit increases throughout COVID. Now, this is primarily because it's an activity that can be done with social distancing. And as we talked about earlier on, one of the things I always loved about motorcycle, you could be by yourself within your own helmet, but you can be with your buddies as well too. So from a motorcycling point of view, it's what's going to happen post-COVID. Now, Asian sales, without a doubt, have been down. Many smaller displacement motorcycles, but the idea is with these seeds they've planted, strong motorcycle sales look to continue. That's the first thing. Racing, that's a big challenge. I think there's always going to be that competitive desire and focus moving forward. But I would say without a doubt that every manufacturer will be reevaluating their racing budgets at this point in time. It's not so much a bad thing. I mean, when I look at more with the super sport look versus super bike, can you still have competitive racing that is less cost? Everybody, including F1's going for it. So the manufacturers will still support racing, but I think it will be on a different level.
Andrew, we wanted, before we wrap up our final show of 2020, to bring in the guy known as Kawasaki Bob. I think he's given up that title now that he's no longer at Kawasaki. Bob Caldwell, working for a dealership down in Burlington. They sell Kawasaki. When's the last time you two guys had a conversation or met face to face?
I think it was at the Supercross, Pat, a few years ago down at the Dome. Andy walked through and looking very dapper as he was. Pat, if I may, I'd just like to say thanks for getting me on here. I didn't really expect to be on here, but Andy, it's great to see you. It's always great to see you. Andy was one of my mentors when I came on board at Kawasaki. If I can, just to give you a background, I was doing the demo ride for Cowie for the early 90s, and Andy was the district manager for Southwestern Ontario. And Andrew, one day after a demo ride at Brampton Cycle, said to me, "Would you like to work for Kawasaki?" And I remember to this day, there was a shift. Royce Baker went out, Andy went in, I went to the East Coast. It was 95 when I started, and what I was inundated with was Andy's enthusiasm for racing. And it was unbelievable. Every time we went to the track, the bar went higher. And there was one pit tent that went to 10 pit tents, that went to trailers, that went. I think we drove the industry at that time, Pat, as far as pushing other manufacturers to up their game for that whole 9-year period. It was phenomenal. And it was wonderful to be a part of that. And Andy and Debbie were the driving forces behind that, as well as Shuji and a few other people. But Andy's enthusiasm, and there was many things that he taught me as a sales manager as well. And just funny enough, yesterday I just finished my Ayn Rand book, Atlas Shrugged. This is a card that Andy gave me as a marker probably 15 years ago. It took that long. Outside of that, one of my favorite moments was at Shannonville, and Andy perpetually had the rule book in his back pocket. And I think it was Paul Bassrash was heading up Trombino and the Yamaha team. And the action behind the pits was just as exciting as it was on the track when they were toe to toe. And I don't know if you remember that, Andy, do you? Do you remember what it was about?
I don't remember what it was about.
It was something about one of our riders getting taken out. And anyway, it was very interesting because John from Yamaha, and John and I literally took 2 steps back as, Mr. Knowles there and Paul went like within spitting distance of each other. Fantastic time.
Amazing. Let me just say one quick story about Bob. Bob, it was a pleasure to meet with you and a pleasure to have you on our team and a pleasure to personally be friends with you along the way. One quick story about Bob. Bob was in the East Coast as the district manager. A position opened it up in Ontario, and Bob wanted to come to Ontario. And you know what? Bob was so successful down there. It took him a little while, but he was so successful down there because he really got involved with the dealers, the groups, what was going on down there, that I almost didn't want to move him because he was doing too good a job. So Bob brought me these Chinese good luck balls. You know, the ones that you put in your hand and you roll around to do exercises? So Bob comes to me and he says, this is why I should come to Ontario. And I said, what do you mean? And he hands me these 2 Chinese silver balls and says, because I've got these and I can do a good job for you. I said, okay, brought him to Ontario. It was one of the best things I've ever seen somebody do to try and secure a position, and it worked.
Andrew, go ahead, Bob.
I was just following the leader, Pat.
Okay. Andrew, one question I meant to ask you a little bit earlier. You've been to all kinds of racetracks, different countries. What are your top 3 racetracks that you've been to? And is there one that's on the bucket list you haven't had a chance to get to as yet?
Well, that's interesting. I think most of the racetracks that I consider, it's always because of personal experience. So from that point in the US, Road Atlanta and Laguna, I both love, partly because of elevation and so forth. And from a Canadian standpoint, I mean, as a pure regional enthusiast track, certainly Shannonville, but Mossport was a very, very special place to me. Shuby had a unique experience with its roller coaster and Eastern mentality. As far as worldwide goes, there's best experience that I can ever remember is when I went with Don Monroe to the Catalunya circuit in Barcelona to introduce the brand new ZX6. And we got to put a number of laps out there on it, as well as I spent a lot of great times with Don during that trip. But that track to me is one of the best tracks in the world. So just something that can be a lot of fun. And literally there's not a bad day when you're motorcycling. And the last thing that I would just like to say, and thank you very much to Bob for your comments. I always appreciated him and many in the industry, but Canada is a smaller market. Even the US, as numbers go, is a smaller market. So the idea is the motorcycle manufacturers, I always believe, as well as dealers, should get somebody riding a bike first. And then we can fight about what brand that they can go with. But the idea of one manufacturer racing and 2 pull out, and 1 jumps in and 1 out, and I always called that corporate agenda. One of the reasons I believed in supporting events and then continuing to support events, whether they're ATV or cruiser, KX or ZX sport bikes. But that continuity is what we ask for from our enthusiast riders. We want them to be riders every year. So as manufacturers, support them every year. So by all means, economic realities, close the gap, spend a little less money, but don't pull out of things. And second would be work together. So dealerships, if you've got 5 dealerships in an area, work together for a demo ride. If you've got a group of people who support, you mentioned the SOAR racing organization, I would challenge every dealer in the area, even if it's just a tiny bit, support racers. Even if it's just a little bit, they will always do it. One of the dangers, and Bob knows this well, because he did such an amazing job during our demo rides. Remember, Bob told me a story that people would come up to him and say, wow, that's so cool of what you do. I would do it for free. And Bob would say, don't say that, because I want to be paid. And I remember that as well, too. We're privileged to be in this business, and we're privileged to be part of it.
Well, Andrew, it's been a privilege having you on the show. I know you've got a full Tuesday ahead of you there in Osaka, Japan. We got to think about maybe watching a football game or getting ready to get some rest after a busy holiday season. Bob Caldwell, I want to thank you for being on the Track Announcers Notebook show tonight. And for everyone who joined us here this evening, I know we've got a number of our American friends, Doug Teague, Henry DeGao, along with Bob Coy and others. And we had a couple of racers on, Pat Barnes, Alex Coelho. hopefully they can get to Daytona in March. But I'm really glad or Stuart twisted my arm and we got this Track Announcers Notebook show together and on the air or online back in early May. We just keep trucking along, enjoying the ride, if you will. And I want to wish everyone very, very happy holiday season and all the best in 2021. Andrew, thanks again. Stuart, it's been great working with you. And Bob, have a great 2021. And to everyone who has been on the show tonight.